Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Solidarity Live. We have today a very interesting show. We will be talking about the Build Back Better plan, as always, in perhaps our first segment ever to feature discussions of nautical activism. Alex, good morning. How are you?
Morning. Definitely not our first conversation about nautical advocacy, as Jocelyn is a renowned nautical advocacy influencer.
Yes.
I believe the most significant nautical advocacy influencer in the world.
Oh, totally. Yeah, of all the kayaktivism coverage that has ever been done, I think that act.tv is the best for sure. And, we're kind of joking, but not really. So for those who missed it, Center for Popular Democracy, CASA, and a couple other wonderful groups did some just beautiful actions this week. They sailed out into the Potomac and protested Joe Manchin at his yacht from the water. Did you get to watch it, Alex? Mm-hmm. It was so cool.
It was. And I think the question that some people are asking, but not many of our viewers, is why were you protesting Joe Manchin, Jocelyn? And that gets to the question right here. WTF, DC? What are you doing? So this week has been a lot. There's a lot of leading up to yesterday. And then what happened yesterday is that Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema just are saying, no, we're not going to, not only are we going to say no to what you want, what President Biden wants, what Leader Schumer wants, what Speaker Pelosi wants, what 96% of the Democratic caucus are working tirelessly to get across the finish line. But these two senators, Kristen Sinema from Arizona and Joe Manchin from West Virginia, are saying, no, the American people will get nothing. And just to heighten it, the establishment and the progressives working together are saying, well, what do you want? What is it that you want then? And they won't tell. Joe Manchin yesterday actually came out and showed some of his cards, but Kristen Sinema continues to play the super mavericky role. Axios today wrote up just clear stenography for Chamber of Commerce. Kristen Sinema is the most basic senator that exists. She just comes in, takes bags of cash, and says, "What do you want me to say?" There is nothing mavericky about it at all. It's just good old-fashioned DC corruption. The thing that people hate about Washington, D.C. Is Kristen Sinema. The only difference is that she wears like loud clothes. So then people are like, hey, you wear loud clothes. And she says, all the criticism of me is sexist. And it's like, are you kidding me? I don't care what she wears. She can wear whatever she wants, whenever she wants. She is free to do all of that. What I care about is that she is selling our future for like small checks. And, it's a lot of money, but I do think that people have it wrong in their head about what corruption looks like, Jocelyn, because when on the one end, we're talking about trillions of dollars, right? So you're like, well, she must be getting rich. And you're like, she's not. We're talking about $5,800 checks from a bunch of businesses into her campaign account. She is selling our future for peanuts. And
I just want to say that I have just had the best idea ever. And I think everybody write this down. We start a political PAC to bribe these politicians for more money. Why have we not thought about it before? And we should just get as much publicity as possible. Be like, okay, Big Pharma gave you this much. We're going to give you this much and see how they respond. Maybe it will work. Hasn't been tried yet.
It's a great idea. It's a great idea.
I'm fine with bribery if it means we don't die in the climate crisis.
But in truth, what does work they pretend it doesn't work. They're like, bullying doesn't work on me. And you're like, it's not bullying. We're going to fire you. We're going to primary you. We're going to replace you. We're going to make your professional life difficult. We're going to boo you wherever you go. Literally, we're going to drive kayaks. I don't think you drive kayaks. We're going to paddle kayaks out to your yacht with a camera crew, i.e. Jocelyn and Will, live streaming this to tens of thousands of people, all united in believing that you, Joe Manchin, are a dickhead. And that is, I always get the side wrong. That is why the Chiron here is just WTF DC. And I do want to end with, or this little piece with, the other half of that is that progressives were just flexing all day and being like, no, we're not going to roll over for these two assholes who won't even tell us what they want. We know what we want. We want lower drug prices. We want expanded health care. We want childcare covered. We want paid family leave. We want the climate crisis to be dealt with at the most minimal level. We're not even aiming that high here. What they're talking about are the compromises, but we know what they're fighting for. And they held strong. And in fact, in the little skirmish that happened yesterday, they won that skirmish. But still, WTF DC is I think the rule of the day, Jocelyn.
Well, and I think there are a couple things to remember with Joe Manchin that, those of us who spend all our waking hours being frustrated at him forget other people may not know. The argument that people like Joe Manchin make for their behavior is, oh, I'm from this ruby red state and I have to be bipartisan or else I will lose my seat and I won't represent my constituents. But it's just not true. West Virginia is a state that went for Bernie Sanders in the primary. It's a state that is previously very progressive. I mean, the coal jobs are union jobs. And perhaps most importantly, it's a state that is incredibly underserved by Joe Manchin's politics. It's a state with incredibly high COVID rates that will be very vulnerable to the climate crisis, that is very vulnerable to a changing economy where there are cancer clusters and people who need healthcare and people who need support, who need public support. And when we were like the boat activism was gorgeous and fun and wonderful, but the underlying objective and cause was not funny or anything. Like, these were people who, West Virginia constituents who took a step away from their lives because they were so upset and terrified that this very promising legislation, which, obviously it's the most promising piece of legislation we've had so far, is vulnerable because of one guy. Well, two guys, Cinema too. But think about how crazy this is. You have 435 members in the House. You have all of these senators that are willing to work on this bill. And you have two people that could stop 300 million Americans from receiving the public support they need. And I think the insanity of that needs to really be grappled with. We have two people that are holding what is just such a necessary influx of infrastructure spending. Like, they're just why? Because of this alleged bipartisanship, but we both know that's not actually what it is. We know that's not what it is.
It's not what it is at all, Jocelyn. There's no it's just bags of money. We know that. West Virginia, and I think you said this really well, West Virginia as a state is the leading state in need of the support, the exact support that is included in Build Back Better. West Virginia is like the state, Appalachia, that the Biden agenda is focused on. The idea that there's some bipartisan thing against lowering drug prices. Yesterday, the same day this all happened, yesterday, Harvard came out with their poll showing yet again that lowering drug prices is the number one concern for the American people. So why is Joe Manchin? He says, "Oh, it's a fiscal insanity. We can't be spending money on people." I want to remind people of who Joe Manchin is. This man started a coal company in the 80s that still pays him and his son runs, which is a catastrophe. It's been bailed out by the taxpayers twice because it's not profitable, just like the entire extractive industries. It only succeeds with our tax dollars. And along the way, everyone in West Virginia's costs went up. Why do we have to pretend that that's not what's going on here? All Joe Manchin is doing is protecting his welfare, his suckling of the public or feeding at the public trough. He's just a greedy little pig eating out of the trough, and it's our money. But the other thing is, not only is he stealing our money, he's destroying the world. He only wants to remove pieces of the agenda that actually address the climate crisis. And I want to be really clear about this, because the good news about now is that we're allowed to be meaner than we have been. Like, people were like, "Oh, easy, we're still making There's been no progress made. This is rule number 4 in Lawson's DC rules. If someone can't tell you what the plan is, there is no plan.
Okay, can I ask? Oh,
yes.
Sorry. I just wanted to know what rules 1 through 3 were, okay. But continue.
Number 1, always Veep. Never House of Cards. Always Veep. Never House of Cards. Number 2, meetings are more often a waste of time than productive, i.e. meetings aren't work. Number 3, which is a corollary of 2, but is important on its own. When you walk out of a BS meeting because it's wasting your time, it's important to slam your hand on the table and make a big thing about it. Like, this meeting is garbage, and then walk out. You'll never be invited to that meeting again. And now you've just freed up some space. And then right after that is rule number 4. If they can't tell you what the plan is, there is no plan. That's where we are now. So now we're back in our court. Our court is like, these two are the problem. Let's put as much pressure on these two as possible. Let's expose them for who they are and what they're doing. There's no maverickiness here. This isn't some, I just want to do what's right for my constituents. This is just corruption. This is just straight old corruption, and everybody understands that in politics. Kristen Sinema, just FYI, her name is Kirsten Sinema, but I refuse because I don't like her. I don't like her. I have never liked her. So I'm in the rare camp that I don't have to be like, man, I wish we didn't endorse her for Senate. You know who we didn't endorse for Senate? Her. Even though the majority hung in the balance of her winning that seat, I was like, yeah, but she's terrible. This is not better. And so we're going to primary her. I'm a little all over the place, Jocelyn, because it is a WTF DC morning. But the main thing is, let's tell the truth about what's driving these people. Joe Manchin is a coal executive. He is the executive. Oh, it's all in a blind trust. That's all garbage. The only thing I will say about Donald Trump that's like somewhat nice is that he just did away with the whole play acting that they do in DC, where they're like, sure, I get a ton of money from this, but it's in a blind trust. I have no say in it at all. It was just like, of course you have a say in it, Mr. Joe Manchin, whose son runs the company that you founded. That's what this is about for Joe Manchin. For Kristen Sinema, she has never been important. She's a footnote to a footnote. She will be forgotten, immediately forgotten, as soon as this just random aberration where she has a seat through a confluence of events, none of them being her work, And when her staff start fleeing the ship, which is right now, because they don't want to be forever tagged as traitors to the American people, she will then be forgotten. No one's going to be like, hey, that Kirsten Sinema, what a maverick. That's what she craves. What drives her is actually just being in the center of the story. So know that. We should know that. She likes being in the center of the story. And people who like being in the center of the story, she like pretends that she doesn't care if she's the hero or the heel. She does care. Those people care the most. So everybody right now, the pressure, the strategy, because the progressives showed themselves, not only did the bloc maintain and say, no, we're definitely not going to throw our agenda overboard. The bloc got stronger, Jocelyn. More people came on after Joe Manchin said, actually, I want 1.5 trillion and I want to means test everything and put work requirements on it. So I want to exclude as many people as possible from getting these benefits, i.e. making the Democratic promises just garbage. This is what we're up against. These two, and we have to break these two. We have to focus on Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, figure out ways to get them to move. Now, I think Joe Manchin is very dealable with. We want to make it as dear for him as possible. We want as much on our side as possible. Kristen Sinema, I'm not sure if she's dealable with. I think we will have to push her, drag her across the finish line.
Well, and, I think perhaps we should talk a little bit about what's really at stake here, because I don't, understandably, it's easier to follow electoral politics. They're, pretty straightforward, this person versus that person. In better countries, it's several people versus other several people, but whatever. But I don't, one thing that I was really struck by when we were out on the water, Brad was there in spirit virtually, is that these, again, are West Virginia activists that have traveled to DC. I was in a boat with a woman, and she was just, you guys really should go watch our coverage. It's on the act.tv page. She was talking to me about how she has 3 jobs and kids and a husband, and she'd never been to DC before. Never. She was there because everything in that bill is going to be life-changing for them. These are people who are working class Americans who are working 80 hours a week to not even have a basic tenable grasp on any kind of material stability. And I think it's just like mind-numbing. It is mind-numbing how precarious things are for people right now. For everybody. I mean, I bring this up a lot on the show. I think it's really important that we realize it's not just working class and middle class Americans that are struggling. Upper middle class Americans are having horror stories, where Nancy brought up a similar story when we had her on last. You're having horror stories of upper middle class people, privileged people whose $1 million retirement accounts are wiped out by medical emergencies. Think about that. The just complete material precarity that means for every single person in this country. Unless you are literally a multimillionaire, you are not disaster proof from this craven pharmaceutical industry, from the craven housing industry, from the craven healthcare industry. And it's multifaceted. And I think the reality is that people are overwhelmed right now because we're getting it from all sides. We're hearing that we have 5 years to fix the climate crisis, and we're hearing that medical bankruptcy is the most likely cause we'll have of being poor. And I think people are just like, it's so much. It's so much. And so it's really lovely to have actions like what Center for Popular Democracy did, because it's like, people who were willing to leave their very busy lives to row out on a boat and say to this guy on his $1 million yacht, we elected you. What you're doing is corruption. What you're doing is morally and politically just putrid, right? I mean, you and I talk about this a lot, Alex. We're not talking, well, you and I actually are like, yes, we deserve thriving wages and thriving healthcare. But a lot of the people protesting are not even saying that. They're not even saying, let's have some kumbaya utopia. They're asking for basic survival conditions. And that's disgusting to me. Like, that's disgusting. And so we have this opportunity where if we can get these two people out of the way, things could be a lot better for a lot of people very quickly.
Yes, things would be materially better for people. I am sort of stuck on how do we pressure these two? And I think that, a kayak flotilla is one way. In Arizona, there's a lot of work being put into going to Kristen Sinema's support network, the people who got her to where she is, who've been able to roll with it the whole time, being like, we believe you, we trust that you have a strategy. But these are Democratic voters, right? Like, right. The thing that she's blocking is not like a little bit. This is the core of Democratic agenda, and it's not some progressive agenda, right? Bernie Sanders did not win the presidency. Joe Biden did, and this is Joe Biden's agenda, right? This is not some crazy, not that Bernie Sanders' ideas are even like they would put us at the back of the pack of Western Europe among our peer nations. But in this country, we're like, oh my God, everyone would have health care. Be amazing. Who could even imagine that? And you're like, literally everyone who doesn't live here can imagine that because we are the aberration here. She's standing in front of that. So there is a move to push Ruben Gallego into primary her. The Arizona Democratic Party said that they were going to give her a vote of no confidence, meaning they'd support a primary against their own sitting senior senator, the senior senator from Arizona. So, like, her play is not a play. That's the thing that's interesting to me about this, Jocelyn, is that usually, like Joe Manchin, like after the Bonomi folksy part, you're like, you're a coal executive, dude. Like, you're literally one of the five. I think it has aged really poorly, The Naked Gun 2. I don't know if those movies are stand up, but in it, they do have this one scene where they have all the villains, and the villains are just the coal executive, the oil executive, the nuclear executive. That is who he is. That's who he is. And West Virginia is a dinosaur when it comes to energy policy. That's what he wants. He wants to continue pulling out dead dinosaurs. It doesn't make any sense economically. We know that sustainable energy is much cheaper at this point. That's why we have to pump hundreds of billions of dollars in direct subsidies to these industries, and also limit their liability by trillions of dollars. And that's what these guys are fighting for. But they do have weaknesses when we point out what they're fighting for. Joe Manchin is the also pinnacle of like machine politics. So his Democratic Party in West Virginia is very much controlled by him. So the pressure on Joe Manchin is he likes what he does here. He's a coal executive who's a senator. He likes being able to be a deal maker going around town. We need to make that image of him gone. We need him to be the obstacle, just corrupt, oil-soaked, money-soaked, standing in the way of all of what we want to accomplish. And just keep pushing on that as much as possible. Get creative. And I don't know, you can have your own opinion on this, or this is a guess, is what I'm saying. after yesterday, I think this is going to take a while now, Jocelyn, because there's no way the progressives are going to bend now.
Could you lay out the timeline for people? So like give us a synopsis, Alex, of like where we've come with this bill and how much further you think there is to go.
Yes. So I will start with saying should I be mean to some of my friends? I will. I'll be pretty mean to some of my friends.
I did not endorse this. Let the record show.
Now, my friends are like some of my non-political friends, non-policy friends, who like, they watch the TV and they just have these like conventional wisdom. It's just like in there, right? And they're like, oh, the progressives are standing in the way. They'll never accept half a loaf. That whole thing, right? Like,
oh yeah, I've heard that.
They should just take the deal. This is just them. This is Bernie Sanders wanting the radical idea of everyone has health care. Earth to Alex, this is the real world. None of them know what's going on. They literally have zero idea what is in the so-called BIB, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So if you ever face somebody like that, just snap in their face, which is super rude, and then say, what is in the bib? Tell me one thing that's in there. And they won't be able to. Here is what is in the bib. And this is actually important for your question, Jocelyn. This is the fundamental reason why we're seeing what we're seeing. Bravery from the progressives, but the mercenaries made it way easier to be brave because the so-called bipartisan infrastructure bill, which I will call the BIB from now on, because the branding that this is bipartisan, it's not, it's a Republican bill, and that it's some sort of infrastructure bill, makes people assume that this is a good thing. It's like naming, a bill to give the NRA a case of rocket launchers, the ice cream tastes good bill. Everyone's like, how are you against the ice cream tastes good bill? And you're like, you should read it, folks. Read the bill. Here's what it does. It pumps hundreds of millions. I'm sorry. The surface reauthorization on it is about 500 billion. The most normal part of it is just the normal money that we spend to keep our highways going. On top of that, it's hundreds of billions of dollars that incentivizes, subsidizes the fossil fuel industry. That's what's in the bib. That's why Joe Manchin wants the bib. Hundreds of billions of dollars that subsidizes the fossil fuel industry, accelerating the climate crisis. That's what's in the bib. So you're like, why are the progressives, flexing? And there was all this thing, oh, the progressives are going to fold, or they always fold. Progressives are, because they'll take half a loaf at the end of the day. This isn't half a loaf. This is a moldy pile of putrid, rotten something, bread. It's disgusting. So that's why Joe Manchin wants it. $500 billion. It's actually more than that in fossil fuel extractive industry subsidies. So what's in the Build Back Better? The only way that you would have anybody who cares about climate vote for that, which subsidizes car use, which just eviscerates the parts that subsidize transitioning to renewable energy, is you have, at the same time, you pass the Build Back Better agenda. Because then you're like, I hate that I gave all this money to cars and further entrenching, the environmental, the bad environmental policies of the past by putting in more money for good environmental policies for the future. That's what's in the Build Back Better. That's why they can't pass just the putrid garbage bill on its own, because no one's going to vote for it. It's not like a Bernie Sanders and Pramila Jayapal are the only people against it. This is deep into the progressive caucus. At least half of the caucus have said they would vote against it, which, as the largest caucus, is right around 50. There's 28 people publicly on the whip, publicly on the count of people who vote against it. And the Democrats can only lose 3. 3. So even if you lost an enormous number of those, you would still have enough to say, we're not voting for just the garbage piece. We're going to only vote for all of it at once. So there was this big push by Manchin, Sinema, and their little lackeys in the House, Gottheimer et al., to get the vote on the garbage bib, the bib garbage. I'm trying to figure out a new moniker for it, Jocelyn.
I'm sorry, but bib sounds too snappy and cool. You gotta try again. Keep going, though.
Garbage bib.
The garbage bib. I like that.
Or I can also just go back to calling it the BIF, which was the Bipartisan Infrastructure Framework. And I thought that was the most apt acronym, the BIF. So now I think a reality is settling on. I'm looking at the news over here. And
any updates?
No, it's just like the framing from the corporate media is amazing, because they want all of this to be about progressives are standing in the way of this infrastructure bill, or they want to do Democrats in disarray. Because the corporate media is literally the propagandist for the plutocrats that Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema work for. I think so. I'll do timing, and then I want to get to Joe Manchin is a plutocrat. He's a coal executive. He's like a baby plutocrat, though, right? But he like sits at the table. Kristen Sinema has never seen the table before, and her overriding goal is to be at that table. That's all she wants, to be the cool kid at that table. And we want to say, you're never going to be at that table. Never. You're not important enough. And the only way that you will be important is by standing with your team in passing things that are massively popular. So what does the timing look like now, Jocelyn? Now, I bet we have time. I bet you that it's going to take a while. They're pushing for another vote on the BIF today, but nothing has changed. And if anything, the progressives are feeling much more validated in there, because even though the corporate media does as much as they want, the American people, the public, aren't dumb. They're like, I remember what happened when you said we'd come back to the $15 minimum wage. You remember that? We were going to do it. And then you guys said, oh, just put in your vote, pass it, and then we'll come back. Well, we still don't have it. We still don't have it. So people are not falling for the just trust Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema to do the right thing. Never trust them. Trust them zero. You have to force them to do the right thing. So,
and then primary them if they don't.
And probably if they do as well, because primaries have a way of focusing politicians' brains.
Well, and speaking of focusing politicians' brains, I'm not a big the mainstream media person, but sometimes, and I have to say, the way this is being written about in the mainstream media is just so deceptive. I love that you bring up Joe Manchin's status as a coal executive. You'd think that would be top of the line. Seriously, you'd think that would be the first thing that gets mentioned in any real discussion about this engine. Instead, it's like, Joe Manchin is a young man of West Virginia. He's just a folksy gentleman. He likes to think about what his parents would say about each bill. It's like, what? And you really do get this sinister nostalgia of wow, Joe's just a good old boy. He wants to make everyone happy. Okay. I'm sure this is why I'm telling you, we've got to do the counter corruption pack. It's something that we haven't considered yet, Alex. Have we tried bribing them? Because that is actually what's going on. Similarly, you read about Sinema and it's deft communicator. She's she bills herself as the next John McCain. It's no, that's not what's going on here. And if you guys don't believe me, read literally any piece about any of these people, and you're going to get this kind of rhetoric that Sinema is this like unique, eccentric unicorn legislatively, and Joe Manchin is this folksy good old boy who just turns to his West Virginia neighbor and says, neighbor, I want to make us all happy. Well, Joe, they're talking to you. They want a living wage, a planet to hand their children. And this is another thing. I mean, if Joe Manchin were really concerned about a state which receives a lot of economic support from coal, I mean, switching to a green economy is a great way to solve that problem. A wonderful way to solve that problem, because not to pivot, but when it comes to the, any form of non-renewable fuel, it's like, if you don't care about the moral argument, care that it's not economically sustainable. It's not. These industries are going down. Do not invest in them. They've got a couple more years, best.
So one thing that I do think, I'm just reading this New York Times article, which is all like progressives are bad. We are getting through to some people because they are in the media. And I am one of the people who bags on the media. That's why we have act.tv and we act radio. And I say before the political revolution, we need a media revolution, because right now the plutocrats control the story. And as my business partner at We Act Radio, Kimon Freeman, always says, until the lions have storytellers of their own, the stories will always glorify the hunt. And so we need our own storytellers. That's why we do this show. We have to get out the very simple story that, in fact, the centrists aren't anywhere near the center. They're not at all. They're super extreme, super extreme. The progressives are just extraordinarily mainstream. All the things they fight for are very, very popular. There are some progressive, some radical policies that don't have mainstream support yet. Most of those are not in any of the so-called, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party aren't pushing a lot of really radical policies. I know because I try to get them to push them. I write them for them, and I'm like, here they are. And they're like, I love this, but no. Some like them and push them. But I will say, I always put a radical tax in all of my policy when I'm working on it. I make it I'm like, and we will seize the houses of the C-suite and turn them into public housing. And then offices are like, we got to take that part out. And I'm like, oh, man. But hopefully it protects the rest of it. That is the reality of what we're dealing with. It's not the case that these centrists are anywhere in the center. It's not the case that these moderates are in any way moderate. And it's not the case that the progressives are in some way outside the mainstream. This is the mainstream. The 96 members of the House Democratic Caucus are part of the Progressive Caucus. It is the mainstream. There are like more establishment-y Democrats. This is their policies too. The only people who are standing in the way are extremists who are just operating for money. So I that's just me pontificating, but that's what the show is. So me and you, Jocelyn, it's nice having our own show to pontificate on.
It's true.
The truth of so we do what we do, but I will also, if we're doing a whole bunch of truth telling today, Jocelyn, you know what the biggest problem is right now? Why we don't have the nice things? It's Joe Biden. Not that he's fighting against it. I'm actually super happy with like where he started, right? Like that he wants to accomplish these things. But if you want to accomplish these things, President Biden, you gotta use your bully pulpit, my man. You've got to come in here and knock some heads. We need that, not these polite meetings that you have at the White House where afterwards, Manchin says, oh, like, no, he didn't even get to that. We need President Biden to use the full weight and force of what he has at his disposal, which is the entire executive apparatus plus the entire political apparatus on the outside, his vice president, all of the things. They need to put as much effort into turning Kristen Sinema's vote and Joe Manchin's vote as they did in beating Bernie Sanders in South Carolina. Do you remember how hard? I mean, they got the entire corporate media, every single the member of the Democratic establishment elite, including President Obama, to call all of the other candidates and have them drop out and line up behind Joe Biden, and they won. That's what we need to see. We need to see the ruthlessness that the party uses against the left side of the party, used against the right side of the party. The problem is coming from the mercenary right side of the party, and we need the Democratic leadership to overtly accept that and start knocking heads.
Well, and it's, I think the real issue, you know, everyone always makes this stuff conspiracy theory-ish. And, you know, I don't think it's that. I think that's definitely part of it, right? Money and power is always going to have an outsized effect on but I really do think that what you're talking about, Alex, that dynamic of Democrats will turn on progressives in a heartbeat. They're not as threatened by Republicans, which is crazy, but it's a very real psychological dynamic where people are more threatened, angry, jealous, whatever, like tons of negative emotions get provoked by people when they feel their thing is getting taken by someone else. And you know, it's a real problem because you have Democrats who are like, let's work with Republicans, like work across the aisle, bipartisanship. And then they're the same people that make Bernie Sanders, who in any other developed country would be a centrist Democrat, like out to be a supervillain because they view progressives as a threat to their home turf. They don't view Republicans that way, which is terrifying. I mean, that's a terrifying thing when we have literal Republicans invading the Capitol and threatening the life of the Speaker of the House. Like, that should be the enemy, right? And yet we're living in this crazy upside down world where there is nothing Republicans can do that will stop Democrats, or certain Democrats, fortunately not all, from trying to work with them. It does not matter that they literally tried to start a civil war a few months ago.
Can I just, you're so right. And I just, it's unbelievable to me that, and like, again, I'm thinking of my friend. I don't know if he watches the show, but if he does, he knows I'm talking about him. He's a very smart person. And when he sees policy that's bad, he's like, man, how did that get passed? And I'm like, you are how it got passed. You who fetishizes this moderate thing where like, oh, well, if only we worked with are you kidding me? It's the one side is like, kill all people who don't look like me. And the other side is like, can we have health care? And then these supposedly big brain people are like, I can't tell the difference between the two. What's wrong with you? You're the problem. And I want to, I'm going to give it back to you after this, just because I just wanted to double down on what you just said. Everyone should remember, carve it into your heart. We could pass everything with a reconciliation bill. Everything that's in the BIF, we could put it in the reconciliation bill. We don't need any Republican votes. The whole thing was just to allow some Republicans to vote for something, and they made it a big floating stinky thing of garbage to get a few Republicans. And it's so few Republicans. It's not even a real amount of Republicans. They have fetishized this. These are the people who invaded the Capitol, and they're like, yeah, well, our voters back home want to see us working across the aisle. No, they don't. They don't care at all about that. They care about that as little as they care about the deficit. You know what people think the deficit means? They think that it means the economy. They don't care about the deficit. The Republicans have this on lock. They say deficit, 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 while they are pushing austerity that makes the economy goes down. And then they blame the deficit. People get pissed off about it at the Democrats. And then when they come in, they deficit spend just enormously.
And I would really recommend that people read the book Debt. It's a great book, but I think that, God, there's so much to say and we only have a couple minutes left. But another thing that people need to carve into their hearts, a government going into debt is not like a person going into debt. And that's what people really don't understand. We have this idea, so you hear this like huge numbers of dollars and you're like, dear God, like, okay, person going into debt to get like some mega mansion they don't need, it's a bad plan, okay? That's not what government spending is like. Government spending is you invest in the economy, you invest in the national defense, you invest in a safer climate, so the public can run. It's not a business. It's not a business. And again, speaking of the national defense budget, we spend trillions on killing innocent people every year. And yet for some reason, that's not something that ever gets questioned. So we know that our government is capable of spending large amounts of money for things they believe to be inalienable goods. But for some reason, when it comes to humanity being at a code red moment, when it comes to a global pandemic, which takes out millions of people all over the world, for some reason, that's where we pump the brakes. And if that doesn't, that's just startling, not even from a moral perspective, but just think about the thinking that has to go into that. Because I think you ask any normal person, not even a particularly empathic one, and you say, if you could just save some lives, you would do it, right? And most people are going to say yes. And I want to add something else about human psychology because, it's important. There is a myth, and I think it's really important that we talk about this on the show a lot. There's a myth that most people are evil. That's actually not true. People are pro-social by nature. People are helpful by nature. Most people, in fact, the reason the banality of evil is a thing is because we are pro-social in-group mammals. And we take our cues from our partners, our friends, our communities. So the reason that we don't have a better political system is ironically because we are such group-oriented people and we don't want to feel like we're rocking the boat and we don't want to be branded crazy radical progressives, which is why it is so important, like you were saying, Alex, that we have this media revolution where we take back the mantle of the truth and say, actually, we're not extremists. We are not extremists for proposing policy interventions that are the bedrock of a moderate developed country literally anywhere else in the world. We are not extremists for saying, hey, if there's a global pandemic, perhaps there should be some public health interventions which prevent 1 million people from dying. Republicans wanted to reopen so badly, we could have reopened a whole lot sooner if the government had done its job. And that is what this is about right now. It's about government doing its job at a very boring level. Very boring.
I don't know. There's so many things to talk about there, like how money works. Have you ever? There's so many. I have a.
Would you like to invest in Bitcoin?
Joe Biden just proposed a rule that's going to have all the Bitcoin people's head explode again today.
Oh, no.
It's going to be great. Grimes left that one dude who went to space, and then Bitcoin is illegalized in China. It's just a great day or amount of time if you enjoy some of the most annoying people in your life getting sad. All of these things head that way.
Don't talk about my exes that way, Alex.
So I know we are running out of time, and this is a sort of a total aside, but have you ever been told that you don't know about economics from some just real, like Ray-Bans, white cap, angry in their truck photo for their profile page?
I mean, I am a woman, yes.
So it's my favorite thing. They're like, oh, maybe you could learn some basic economics. And you're like, you, A, don't even know basic economics, but B, it's important that we actually go beyond basic economics. Our entire system should be based on real and advanced economics, like how money works. And money does not actually work in any way like these so-called deficit hawks believe. We have irrefutable proof that it does not work the way that they say it works at all, and they still are given like credence all over the place. There's one thing that you have to say to them. It's kind of like, well, tell me what's in the Biff, and they can't, Jocelyn, because they've never read it, because they don't pay attention, and they just go with that in-group thing. They're like, oh, it's probably better if we just go with what the mean people say. We don't want to fight them. Japan, just ask them, these economics people, just say, what is your explanation for Japan then? And they will be flummoxed and they won't be able to say anything, Jocelyn. And as you know, the reason I bring up Japan is because they're operating, their debt to GDP level is like 200. It's 234% in 2019. In 16, it was 232. It's only been up there. And they're, I think, third largest economy in the world still. They're doing fine. Money doesn't work the way that, and my favorite thing about these people is like, they're like, oh, well, in 1890, some banker came up with a treatise that this is how money works, and I am wedded to that. And you're like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? We didn't have telephones then, but you think they figured it out? Money works this way. Sovereign nations that print money backed by their full faith and credit can print as much money as they want. And the only thing that matters on that is real inflation. And when there is real inflation, which is not what we're seeing now, what we're seeing now is shortages based because of monopolists and cartels and the COVID disruptions. When there's some inflation, what you do is you remove money out of the system through taxation. And all taxes should be Pigouvian, tax things you don't want, like billionaires. It's that simple. We have the money. We have unlimited amounts of money to spend on the things that we want, on expanding healthcare, on all of the things that we want. And if it ever does heat up the economy, and we're so far away from that, Jocelyn, all you have to do is tax billionaires. I want everyone to understand that is your worldview. If you don't have a fully formed economic viewpoint, all you need to remember is that we have unlimited money to spend. And if it ever heats up the economy, we tax billionaires to cool it down. And then you should read Stephanie Kelton, all of the things that she's written, and you'll understand that this is actually how money works. And in that light, Jocelyn, I want you to really get how sick the discussion that we're having is, right? Like, because we can do all of the things, but you have these guys saying no. You have Kristen Sinema saying no, and you have Joe Manchin saying no. We spend, if you make it apples to apples, we spend twice as much, $7.5 trillion on the military without blinking an eye. Every year, 7.7, 7.7, 7.7. We are we're demanding 3.5 trillion for all of the priorities that are not the military. And this is what we're faced with. This is the backlash for trying to spend less than half of what we spend on a military who has not kept us safe at all from this pandemic, who has no idea about the threats that we are actually facing, who didn't prevent an attempt to overthrow the U.S. government by the former president, caught them all unawares, right? Like, that is the dynamic that we're dealing with. So I'll turn it back to you. I just want everyone to remember how sick and festering and disgusting what Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema are doing, because we have the money. We can do it right now with just Democratic votes. We can do all the things that everyone has promised and gotten elected on, and they're just saying no.
Well, and it's just like, yeah. I mean, it's definitely read Stephanie Kelton, but I also think it's what you're saying.
Definitely read Stephanie Kelton.
I also think what you're saying is almost more important than anything else, right? The reality is, and I was thinking about this as you spoke, I think we're all a little afraid to really acknowledge how much the current political system has taken from us, because it's terrifying. Took the last 2 years of my 20s. I'm still salty about that. Like, it's because all of us, I think most of us, people like me who don't have any immediate crises, are like, I'm doing fine. It's fine. No, it's not fine. It's not fine that, my mom made some joke on the phone the other day. She's like, oh, you make more money than I made when I was your age. It's like, yeah, and I live in a studio apartment. Like, our current political system is not set up for anybody to thrive, which means that if we all take a personal inventory of how much the current economic system has taken from us, whether it's from unnecessary deaths due to healthcare, unnecessary debt due to healthcare, or how difficult it is, because, my mom's right. I do make a lot more money than she did when she was my age, and they owned a house. When you start getting really, like, when you start making that list, it gets terrifying. It gets terrifying because we like to, one thing, and I know we only have one moment left. So, but I will close on this. First of all, go kayaking with some activists. It's delightful. But second of all, we have no problem looking back on other times in history, whether it's World War II or the Middle Ages, and understanding implicitly that the ideas and structures of that time created things which we now call barbaric. Burning witches at the stake, like a king living in 7 castles while people died of famine. We can look back at those times and see it. And yet, for some reason, we have this huge mental block at looking around us and understanding the same thing. And I think that's something that we should be very vigilant and introspective about, regardless of what happens over the next couple months on Capitol Hill. Because these times we're living in, we like to pretend they happen through individual choice, but all the choices we have are created by the political structures we live in. I'll let you close out, Alex. Sorry. It was like a...
Why are you apologizing? Go.
I take it back. No apologies.
Good. That's what you should do. The truth also of all of this is, I don't want to get like macabre on it, but either Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin listen to all of us, and they do what's right, and we get bare minimum, which is a lot. And don't forget, we're fighting for a lot, but it's bare minimum. Or they don't, and we get nothing. And the Democrats are annihilated in the midterms, annihilated, and lose the White House. And we are facing a form of American authoritarianism that we saw just the preview of under Trump. It's going to be that on steroids. It's going to be that, except actually competent. And that is the future that we face. And then we're all going to be united to overthrow that. And then we can build our utopian world where, oh my God, everyone's going to have health care. It's so far-fetched. Can you even imagine that, Jocelyn? Have you even been to any other country that's not ours? Because then you're like, wow, I can totally imagine it. But I will just end with this. The people are going to win as long as we continue to fight, and don't forget what we're fighting for. We will inevitably win. The only question is when. Are we going to win now, or are we going to win later? And I want to win now, because remember, when the people lose, it can be centuries until they win again. But in the long arc of history, we will win. Let's win now. We just have to remind Kristen and Joe Manchin that we have the power. They have no power. Their power is just a reflection of the power of the people. And with that power, we can build the world that we want through solidarity. Thank you, Jocelyn, and everyone who's listening. Call Joe Manchin, call Kristen Sinema, give them a piece of your mind, and tell them to get on board with the vast majority of the American people in the Democratic caucus. Bye, everybody.